welcome back to Wheelwork. I trust you're doing well as always. Today we're going to be doing a bit more work on the Calais skid car behind me here, and what we're going to do is start doing some maintenance and general repairs on the engine side of things. We are waiting on a bunch of parts to come in for this car to fix the suspension, which is sort of the main thing we need to do. But I've actually got half a day spare this morning, so I'm going to get into doing some stuff and try and get through it. We'll go through what we're going to do. The first job that we're going to do on this thing, the first big job, and it's going to be quite a bit to get through today, is I want to mainly work on the cooling system. So all of the coolant hoses are really, really hard, and if you squeeze them hard, they crunch, which means, yeah, they're just not in a good way physically. So I'm going to go through and change all of the hoses. Also going to change the heater tap, which is located down there. These things are very common for failing, and this one is actually starting to leak a little bit. So we'll do that as well. We'll put all new clamps on the hoses, and while we've got the cooling system drained, we'll go through and put a new water pump in it, and I'm also going to delete the thermostat. They do run a bit cooler without the thermostat in it. The thermostat's mainly there to get the engine up to temperature when you first start it to get your heater working and stuff like that, and we don't need that. So coolant flows through the cooling system a lot faster without a thermostat in it. So we'll just delete it and just put a new gasket in it. I'm also going to change some of these pulleys on the front of the engine. And yeah, the other thing I'm going to do as well, because we will be pulling all of the LPG gas stuff out of this in a later episode, but there is two coolant hoses that go to the gas converter, which is back there, and they tap into the heater hoses. So we'll delete those hoses to put the cooling system back to how it was before LPG. There is no gas left in this thing anyway, so the gas is decommissioned, but we will just take everything out at a later stage. So that's that. The other thing I want to do is it is hard to start this car when it's cold, and when it does start, it runs pretty rough. The first thing I checked is, well, I could physically see that the coil packs and ignition leads had been replaced recently in its life. This car hasn't been off the road since 2019. But yeah, they look like they've been changed. They look quite new, as you can see. But I plugged my scan tool in and scanned it, and it's got a fault code for the crank angle sensor, which is very common on these. It sits down behind the harmonic balancer, and its job is to provide the coil packs with a crank signal. So while we've got the front of the motor stuff apart, we will pull it off and do that sensor as well. So yeah, we'll just get into it. All right, so just got into a few little things so far. I've drained the coolant, or if you can call it coolant. It's quite gross. As I said, I will flush that a few times. I've taken the engine cover off, and I just want to show you these heater hoses, sort of how they've done it. So you can see down here, these two hoses here, they go all the way down the front and then up to the gas converter. So normally you've got the hoses from your heater tap. One comes off and goes on there, and then the other one comes off and goes on there. So what they've done is they've actually joined this one, which normally goes on there. So that one now goes to the LPG, and then the other one from the LPG comes down and goes on to the heater tap down there. So essentially what we'll end up doing is just putting that heater hose straight from there back onto there like it was from the factory. Now, something else that has escalated a little bit, I'm actually going to pull the inlet manifold off on this thing. I was having a look at the color of the coolant that came out of it, and because of how rank it looked, it got me thinking. So, and then I had a look on the coolant dipstick here. That browny oily residue, that normally means that the lower inlet manifold gaskets are failed or are failing, which is another very, very common problem on Ecotech V6s. The lower inlet manifold gaskets are made of plastic, and there is oil and coolant that there's coolant that runs through the inlet manifold, and then there's oil underneath it. And when the inlet manifold gaskets start to fail, you get oil residue in your coolant. Sort of gives you a bit of almost looks like it's starting to get a bit of a blown head gasket type situation. I do carry those in stock, and the other thing I'm going to do as well while the inlet manifold's off is I'm going to do rocker cover gaskets. You don't have to do rocker cover gaskets. You can do rocker cover gaskets with the inlet manifold on. It's just easier with them off, but this left one is leaking, so I'm going to end up changing both of them. I do keep all of this stuff in stock. So here are the rocker cover gaskets, rocker cover gasket kits, those two guys, and these are the inlet manifold gaskets. From this though, I'm literally only going to use the front and rear seals and the O-rings because I also carry these. These are the Mace engineering upgraded inlet manifold gaskets. They're made from aluminium, not plastic. They pretty much last forever. So we'll end up banging those in while we got it all apart. So this is where we're up to. Yeah, got all of the schmozzle of hoses out. All of the spaghetti-o. So there's the factory heater hose set up going into the heater tap. And then that's the loop that they put in for the gas. So that's all out. Much more room for activities. Not really. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to slap the water pump on it. There's no right or wrong way in the order of which you do all of this stuff. So as far as doing a water pump on one of these is concerned, once the belt's off, undo these 4 bolts on the front of the pulley. And you've got 4 13mm bolts on the perimeter of the water pump, and then you just got a few 10mm around it. The 13mm do go into water jackets though, so you do need to clean up the threads and put sealant on them when you put them back in. So I'll go through and do the water pump now. All right, so I got the water pump off. I did break a bolt up the top there, loosening it, one of the small 10mm bolts, so I'm gonna have to try and get that out. But that's fine, I guess. But the state of the water pump is not great. I'm glad I'm changing it. So lots of bits have corroded off the impeller on the back of the water pump. The main thing that causes this is not running coolant in your cooling system. You get little bits of rust particles and stuff that goes through your cooling system, which is what turns the water brown. And those little particles, it's just like sandblasting the impeller on the water pump. So yeah, glad I'm changing it. So I'm just going to go through now and clean up the surface of where the water pump goes. I'll get that broken bolt out, slap the new water pump on, and we'll keep going. All right, got that broken bolt out of there, and I've cleaned up all the surface where the water pump mounts. So now we'll just go through and put the new pump on. I do like to put a little bit of Celastic between, on each side of the gasket on these water pumps too. I just find it helps them seal a bit better. So yeah, we'll do that. All right, quick update. New water pump is on. Boom, I got Jason, gonna go pick me up another bolt for that. He's actually got, I didn't say this before, but he's actually got a VX at his place, a VX exec with a blown motor. Mint. Radio. And that's actually going to be donating some parts that go onto this, a couple of the parts for the suspension and whatnot. So if you see secondhand parts in future episodes of this, that's where they're coming from. So yeah, so that's that. And yeah, we've also changed this idler pulley here. This was really, really noisy to spin. So it's got a brand new one on it now. This one is quite stiff to turn and notchy, but we're actually going to delete that one because we're not going to be running the aircon. So when you remove that, you also remove that to run a shorter belt. And the tensioner pulley was a bit rough as well, but I had a good second-hand one here, so I've just changed that and got that one on there, so that's not too bad. So on to the next now. I think we'll do the crank angle sensor and stuff down the front there. That does involve pulling the radiator fans out. They just unclip from here. There's a clip each side. You unclip the power steering reservoir and you undo the electrical connector and they come off and this top shroud as well. And then you can get a rattle gun in there to undo that bolt. So that's that. I do know the power steering oil is low, amongst other things, but we are going to do a steering rack on this down the track as well, so that's why I'm not topping that up. Sweet, so we'll get on to that. All right, shroud off, fans are out. Taking the crank bolt out of the middle of the harmonic balancer there. This is a specific tool that you use for doing, removing the harmonic balancers on Commodores. So that just sort of goes in through the middle. That's it. Hiya. One harmonic balancer, and that is the crank angle sensor right there. Sweet, so the sensor's off. That's what it looks like off the car. As I said, these are very, very common for failing. So that's just held on with these two 13mm bolts. And then above that is this plastic cover that just clips over the front of it. But I'm going to play the while I'm in there card because these front seals on the front of the crankshaft are also common for leaking. So I'm actually going to knock that out and put a new seal in as well.
All right, killer. Got the new seal in, got the new sensor in, so that's all good. So I'm just gonna go through now and blast all of this back together. Just the opposite of me pulling it apart. One thing I will note with these crank bolts though, when you put these back in, you do need to run a little bit of Celastic around the head of the bolt because they can push oil past the threads. So I always just run a little bit of Celastic around the head of the bolt and then just a little bit of medium strength Loctite on the thread of the bolt too. All right, so that side of things is back together. Harmonic balancers is on, the fans are in, the shroud's on, and I even deleted the idler pulley and the idler pulley post that the pulley goes to. It actually snapped when I went to loosen the bolt, but that's fine because that is going right there and that one is going right there. So now we'll get to pulling the top of the motor apart so we can do the inlet manifold gaskets and stuff. So we'll basically start with removing the alternator and that brace. We've got to remove the accelerator cable and cruise control cable and this bracket off the side of the throttle body. Then we've also got to undo the EGR pipe, which is back here, and that can just sort of sit to the side. And we need to go and undo all of the wiring that attaches to the injectors and anything else that's in the way. The 3 spark plug leads that go to the driver's side, just take them off from the coils and push them to the side. So yeah, we'll go through and do all of that. And in the meantime, while I'm doing that, I'll also lay in some of the new hoses. So I'll put all the new heater hoses in and stuff, connect them to the firewall, but I won't connect them here because these pipes actually have to come out to take the inlet manifold off because they go through stuff. So this one here, you just undo that nut, then there's another nut behind it, and then there's another nut there, and that just pops out. And then there's yet a third nut behind it there. You take that off, and then this whole doohickey slides out the side. It runs through the center of this tensioner for the alternator. So yeah, we'll go through and do all that. I'll get it to the point where it's pretty much ready to just unbolt the inlet manifold. I've also got to take off the fuel lines too. There's a special tool that you put in behind here to unclip these fuel lines. So yeah, bit to sort of pull apart, but we'll get it to the point where it's ready to go. I just got a little bit sidetracked. I've just taken the thermostat housing off. So I'm just going to clean off that old gasket, remove the thermostat. Crusty. Yeah, I'll clean up that surface and I'll just bang it back on with a new gasket. I do have a new gasket there. I was going to start putting all the new hoses on, the heater hoses and the heater tap and all that stuff. I did have a heater hose, a full hose kit in stock for what I thought was an Ecotech V6 Commodore, but I think it might be a VS or something because it was quite different. So I've just had to order a new hose kit. And yeah, so once I get that, which should be this afternoon or tomorrow morning, I'll go through and put all that back together. But I'm still going to keep going with all the inlet manifold gasket stuff and the rocker cover gaskets. Quick update, guys. This is where I'm up to. So I've dropped off the alternator, the hydraulic belt, the tensioner for the belt and all that stuff. The thermostat housing is back on with no thermostat in there, which is awesome. And I've just pulled this rocker cover off. I just wanted to have a look inside the motor. That left rocker cover gasket's leaking, but as I said, I wanted to change both anyway. But yeah, it doesn't actually look too bad in there. I have seen much worse, but there's no crusty, chunky bits of dry oil or anything like that in there, which is great. That's what you want. Even though it has been a few years since this thing's been on the road and probably a little bit longer since it's had a service, I'm actually quite pleased with how it looks inside. So anyway, I'm going to put that rocker cover back on. I've just put the new gasket on there. I do also run a little bit of Celastic on the underside of these gaskets as well. Some people say you don't need to. I just like to do it, so I'm going to. So yeah, so that's that. So we'll put that one back on and then we'll keep going. We'll end up pulling off the rest of the stuff that we spoke about before, and then we'll crack the inlet manifold off. You can, some people remove the top cover and then the plenum and then the manifold. I just pull them off all as one unit. So anyway, we'll get into it. All right, guys, I think we're there. Got all the wiring out of the way. There's also a little bracket that sits here, which is that bracket up there. I took that off just to give me a little bit more room. You can sometimes get hung up on them. So I've got all the wiring off this side. Everything's sort of disconnected that we need, as far as I know. So now it should just be a matter of cracking her up. So I'll just get this thing. There's all the bolts from the inlet manifold there. Has definitely been apart at some time before because the bolts are all covered in Celastic. just gonna get my little pry bar under here. And yeah, as you can see, she's lifting up. So yeah, all right, we'll pull this off and have a look underneath it. Once the inlet manifold's off, we'll get that rocker cover off as well. Start getting everything cleaned up. All right, so it's all apart. That's what the inside of that head looks like. Actually looks a bit better than the other one, to be honest. But that's all good. This is what they look like underneath the inlet manifold. So this is the balance shaft that runs through the middle of the engine here. And then you got your push rods. Your lifters are down underneath them. Push rods push up on your rockers. And then the other side of the rocker opens the valve down there. What actually happens on these is that these are water jackets. So there's 4 of them, two each side. And the plastic inlet manifold gaskets fail. And when they fail, you get oil coming up from all through here, works its way into the cooling system, and that gives like the coolant a little bit of an oily residue. And when they get really, really bad, you can actually get coolant going into the oil and turn the oil a little bit milky. So that's why I was saying it sort of gives you that effect of like a blown head gasket type scenario. And I'll show you what it looks like on the actual manifold. So as you can see here, there's a complete failure of the gasket there. And also on this side, there's a complete failure of the gasket there, which is why these plastic gaskets are not really good. They don't last very long. As they go through heat cycles of the engine getting hot and cold, they get brittle and they just destroy themselves. So yeah, that's why we're gonna upgrade them to these aluminium type ones. So I'm gonna go through and get this all cleaned up. I'll get the rocker cover on the passenger side. I'll get all of this all cleaned out, all ready to go, clean up all the mating surfaces, and I'll give you a look once it's ready to go back together. So we're all cleaned up, all ready to go back together. So I just want to talk about Celastic real quick. Sometimes I pull these apart and I see that all of these surfaces are covered in Celastic. All I do is I run a thin bead of Celastic on the front and rear edge of the valley. You do need to run a decent blob of Celastic in the corners where the 2 gaskets meet. And then I also do a thin bead of Celastic around all the water jackets, and that's it. So I'll get all the gaskets laid in now, get the Celastic on it, whatever. And before I drop the manifold on, I'll give you one last look. And that's it, we're ready to go. So decent blob in the corners, but on top of and below of the gaskets. Just a little smear around the, around the water jackets. So yeah, that's it, we're ready to drop the manifold back on. All right, this is where we're up to, guys. Got the majority of it all back together. I'm just waiting on the hose kit and heater tap to come in so we can finish buttoning up the cooling system. But yeah, that's how it's sort of all come out. I've got a shorter belt on there now, which bypasses the air conditioner. So when we get a bit of time, we can remove all the aircon stuff. So yeah, so that's how that looks. Way back when I had my first Ecotech V6, which was a VS, I did get that tuned. And the guy that tuned it said to me, hey, before you tune it, chuck an extra earth cable on to that point there with, you get that earth point on the motor. And he reckons that could give extra power. I highly doubt that to be true, but even if it's half a kilowatt or even if it's nothing, who cares? We'll take what we can get. So the only other things I've done is I removed the coolant overflow bottle, which is from underneath the car, which is held on with 3 10mm bolts. And I just washed it all out. Gave it a good shake because there was a whole bunch of crap in there and sediment sitting on the bottom, and I filled that with fresh coolant, so that's good. I even filled up the windscreen washer bottle with some soapy water. So yeah, that's about it. The only other thing I'm going to do now is just make sure it starts, because I haven't tried starting it since we did the crank angle sensor. So we'll just make sure it runs. We'll just run it for, you know, maybe 10-20 seconds or so, because there is no coolant in it. And if that's all good, I'm going to go through and change the spark plugs as well. All right, here we go. Beautiful. Okay, talking spark plugs for a second. From the factory, Ecotech V6 Commodores run a part number BPR6EFS-15. The number in the middle, being the number 6, is the heat range of the plug. And the last 2 numbers, the 15, meaning the spark plug gap is 1.5 mil. What I run is a BPFR5EFS, so it's a slightly hotter spark plug, and also these are factory gap to 0.8 mil. So closer spark plug gap means that it doesn't like to blow out the spark as much. So if you have one of these things and you're giving it a bit of a hard time, this is the spark plug I always recommend on running. So you can see this thing actually had genuine Holden spark plugs in it, which is interesting. So that has a 1.5 mil spark plug gap, whereas these are a 0.8. So anyway, I'm going to go through and bang a full new set of plugs in it, and I'm just going to have a quick look at all of the old spark plugs when I pull them out. Just make sure that there's nothing untoward on the tip of the spark plug. If you want to see a bit more about spark plug stuff, have a look at my previous video of when I was talking spark plugs on the HZ. But anyway, we'll go through and throw all these in. Rightio, all the spark plugs are in. They all look pretty similar for what I would expect. So not too concerned, except for the fact that they're a bit gritty and a little bit rusty, but yeah, so they're all done. So a bit later on this afternoon when the rest of the hoses and stuff come in, and after I finish the rest of my work for today, I'll go through and finish all the cooling systems. All the hoses are all in, and I've put all new hose clamps on everything too. So I've got new heater hoses, brand new heater tap. So they're all done. New top radiator hose, new bottom radiator hose. Truth be told, the top hose wasn't actually too bad, but it came in the kit of the hoses, so put that on anyway. So now I'm just going to go through a couple of times and fill the cooling system with water, run it up, let that circulate a bit. It'll circulate quite quickly because there's no thermostat in it. So as soon as you start the car, the water will start circulating. So I'm going to do that a couple of times with water, and then I'll actually put a coolant mix in it, and then that side of things is done. Just wanted to point out how to get the air out of the cooling system on these. Again, there's no thermostat in this, as you know, so this is happening a lot quicker. But you need to put like a bit of an extension on the filler of the radiator to bring the fill point above the bleeder. Take the little bleeder screw out, and as you can see, you just let it make a toilet. It'll bubble and fart and stuff a bit to get the air out, and once it starts coming out as a constant flow like that, that's when you know that all of the air is out of it. So that's it, guys, it's all done. I ended up draining and refilling the cooling system with water 5 times. It just kept flowing out quite brown and just got better and better gradually. And then on the last one, I actually put coolant in it. A little bit of a trick that you can do when filling these things up is you can actually fill them with hot water, and that sort of just helps them get up to temp each time. So each time I filled it, I ran it for about 15 minutes or so, and then I was dumping it between each one. And I was just sort of doing that between, I've got another job here now, so I was just doing that between doing that. So that's all done. I even put a new radiator cap on it. So with the exception of the radiator, the whole cooling system on this thing is brand new. So when this radiator blows up, which probably one day it will, we'll look at upgrading that. But for now, that's more than good enough for what we're going to be using it for. So yeah, quite happy with how that's turned out. A lot of you may be thinking, why am I putting so much effort into a car that we're just going to be thrashing around? Even though this is a car that we're just going to use for skids and a bit of track stuff and stuff like that, we want it to be safe, and we want it to be sort of as reliable as it can be. And everything that we're putting onto this, well, the majority of the stuff that we've put onto the car with all these hoses and all that stuff in the water pump, and everything else that we are going to be putting on it in the future is stuff that we can relatively easily take off and put onto another vehicle if something was to happen to this one. So it's all stuff that I don't mind doing and money that we don't mind spending. So that's basically the story for this. Yes, there are going to be some things that you can't really change over, but they're only going to be small ticket items. So that's it, guys. So that's it for this episode, guys. I hope you liked what you see. Glad that we've got the cooling system side of things sorted in this car and actually had it running for a while. We've only ever had it running for like a minute or two at a time, so it's sort of on and off, been idling there for about an hour and a half now. Yeah, and it's actually, for what it is, and considering I haven't done any of the filters or oils or anything on this thing yet, it's actually idling and running fairly well. So all that stuff will happen down the track in future episodes. But yeah, that's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see more of this build, please remember to like and subscribe, and we will catch you in the next video very shortly. Thanks, guys. Bye.